All right, so let's kick off module 2, where we're going to be looking at what causes your weight set point to go up. Now, last week we went through your metabolic thermostat. We kind of had an introduction of what this course is all about with regards to what your set point is currently, what it may have looked like in the past when you filled out that worksheet that kind of gave some more reflections, as well as what your variance might be and how wide your set point is. And this week, we're going to go through highly processed foods. So, this is one factor that relates to set point going up. There are a magnitude of ones. And this is the really neat thing about our weight is that we often quantify if we just don't eat in a day, then we're going to lose weight. But what happens? We try and deprive ourselves, cut out as much food as we can. And then at the end of the day, we just have no willpower at the end of it, which makes sense. Reason being, we're human beings and we need to eat. If we don't eat, we won't live. And by just taking things out is not the approach that works long term. You likely know somebody else that's gone through that, or you're going through that yourself. So, when it comes to sustainable weight loss, we have to be able to bring that set point down. But there's a magnitude of factors as to the reason why it may have gone up and might be sitting that high. And once we can figure that out, we can slowly bring that back down. And one thing is highly processed foods. So we're going to go through a ton of information on here. You've got your PDF as well and worksheets to go through this week, as well as an activity that we'll cover at the end. So when it comes to reflection, this is something that I love to do before we really look at starting any food guide, food plan, or like what we're kind of looking at now is the weight scale and bringing down your set point. So think for a moment, when did your weight gain start? These are the types of questions that I ask the clients that I work with. So we get a really good history and background of what's going on rather than just saying, let's cut some calories. So you're going to be your own coach in this one and take some time, maybe screenshot this and write some answers, or you can do this in your journal. So when did your weight gain start? Think back of when this began. What was going on? What was your situation? Are there others in your family who struggle with their weight? Is there a genetic component to this as well? What medications, restrictive diets, extreme sports did you take or do in the past? When it comes to medications, there's a ton that actually can or do cause weight gain. One of them actually is birth control. For some people, it does cause weight gain, right? Depression with antidepressants can cause weight gain. And we're going to go through that when it comes to medications, as it's just very interesting to know for knowledge. But obviously, we do need those in certain circumstances, but we can pair up with other things in order to bring that set point down. Restrictive diets and extreme sports. Did you compete? Were you very restrictive in your diet? That's going to bring your set point up because of that starvation mode and that decrease in your metabolic rate, if you remember. And again, this can cause a lot of issues going into your future years, even if we did this in our 20s. And I've seen this time and time again. And have you ever suffered an injury that resulted in prolonged period of activity? If you weren't able to move, that could also be a factor that's causing your set point to go up. These are all things that we need to look at and account for, and not just a calorie in, calorie out approach. So we're coming back to our beautiful little simple table here that we're going to kind of, again, go through again and again throughout the few weeks. But looking at this, if we started at 200 pounds, right, at your starting set point, and we just cut the foods out, we wanted to go into deprivation mode. At some point, that hunger is going to go up, metabolism is going to go down, and then we kind of still are at that set point. But if we take a very systematic approach, a set point approach, a metabolic approach, we will have weight loss. And with that, we can reduce the amount of food that we're having. Not necessarily calories if we're doing processed foods. It doesn't mean less, it's choosing better options. And what happens is, we don't feel overfed. We don't feel like we need to eat that same amount. Our body's satisfied. And then we're starting to lower that weight and lower that set point. And it's happy where it's at. So it's not just taking food out, it's actually looking at what foods we're having to actually bring that down long term. It's really cool when we do. So when it comes to our metabolic thermostat and food spectrum, this is the types of foods that we can look at that might be low quality, thermostat raising, high increase of our weight set point, and then really good quality foods that can actually lower our thermostat and start to bring that set point a bit lower. And really just take a look at this and say, okay, what does my intake look on a daily basis? Where am I getting most of my calories from? Is it from the right side of the spectrum or the left side of the spectrum, right? And if we're going to be minimizing things on the right, so it's like your sugars and, the junk food, and grains are great, but if we're getting a lot of them from this right side and very minimal from the left, this is what the problem happens, and we're not adding into our food consumption. So when we kind of do a metabolic thermostat reset, it's about adding in. I'm not about just taking out and leaving out feeling deprived. What can we add in? And think about a broccoli experiment. I say this all the time. If you ate a pound of broccoli a day, that's a lot, would you put on weight? If you ate broccoli 2 pounds a day, would you put on weight? Or 3 pounds? Like that's a lot, right? And it could be a mixture of a ton of vegetables. Let's go for example. Would you have room for all of those things on the right if you ate an abundance amount of vegetables? No, right? So when you think of that, you're like, how much abundance am I getting of these good nutrients? And the more I have of that, the less I'm actually going to want of the other things on the right, and I'm not going to feel deprived. That's how we work on resetting your thermostat, not taking out and feeling deprived and less and less and less. And we're angry at the end of the day and hungry and we have a mood. We want to do this throughout a long-term process and add in. Now, it's not to say animal protein's not great. Corn, potatoes, cheese, milk, these are all things we can add into your diet. I use that word because that's just what I use, a food guide. So, I'm not saying an extreme diet where we're restricting, but that's just a word I use for food plan. We want to make sure we're getting everything in, but more of this stuff on the left as long as you don't have an intolerance to them. So where are you on this spectrum, right? So take a look at your food, your diet right now. Where are you? Now, am I a complete pusher of strictly vegan? All dependent on you. What you enjoy having. Do you enjoy eating animal products? Do you enjoy eating, fish, eggs? Go for it. I do. But everybody's different, right? So you look at your diet and say, where am I? Am I in a low cal, low carb, low fat, meat and potatoes, totally processed diet, or clean eating, right? Where we're getting all those things in, metabolic reset diet, right? Where we're kind of restricting a lot of the processed foods, and strictly vegan, right? So a lot of different areas of spectrum where we can create your own plan. And that's what we're going to do over the 12 weeks. But we want to kind of see where you're at right now, which might make sense why you are where you are. So we'll go into food addictions and set point because this is an important thing to know when it comes to that spectrum. Then we're going to go into the difference between whole foods, processed foods that are highly processed, and then minimally processed foods. So you're going to get a really good amount of information, and you again can watch this video throughout the week and come back to it at any point. So food addictions, they're real. They are real, and they cause us to eat in absence of hunger. If we're addicted to a food, we're going to want to eat more of it, even if we're not hungry. And if we gain a few pounds and shift towards the overfed side so that we're overfed, and our metabolic system is kind of, it's working, but we're eating way more than we need to, what will happen is you'll have less hunger and a decrease in appetite. However, that sugar food is giving us such a dopamine hit, we want it anyway. Right? And we want it anyway. There's not much nutrients in it. So our brain still says, hey, I want more food because I'm hungry or I'm not nutriently fed. So what happens? You want more and more. And we tend to go to that type of food because it gives us a really good feeling dopamine hit, which we'll go into. And food addictions derail the overfed side. They derail the whole thing and our metabolic thermostat, and it sabotages our ability to maintain a stable weight. If we continue to eat these highly processed foods without adding in the really good whole foods, we're setting ourselves up for failure. And this includes diet foods as well. So one way to combat food addictions is to treat them the same way as we would with any addictions to like alcohol or tobacco or drugs, is to enforce taking them out altogether. Now, that is for very extreme food addictions or we have no control. And that's okay because technically we don't need them to live, right? But we do need food in general. So for a lot of us, we don't have that extreme addiction and we do want to be able to have maybe a glass of wine. We do want to be able to have a birthday cake or cookies. So that all or nothing approach of saying take everything out that's processed is extreme. And a lot of diets are pushing that you can't have this, and we're pushing this orthorexia of extreme health conscious food people. And that's not the right approach. If we're very addicted and we can't control, that is something that a therapy could help, a therapist could help as well. But I think that there is a gray zone for a lot of us that we can handle. But again, you know yourself better. So it could be that we need to take out those trigger items. So now let's go into what are the difference between whole foods, minimally processed foods, and highly processed foods. Whole foods, they're just beautifully vibrant. They're natural in their form. So they're not changed or chemically processed in any way. No fiber is removed, which is important for our digestive system and for happy pooping. No nutrition is removed. That's a good sign. And they are nutrient dense. So eat your whole foods. Let's not be scared of these. Add them into your diet, the fruits and the vegetables in abundance amount. I have never met anybody that has a sustainable diet and a high amount of whole foods and a minimum amount of processed foods that hasn't been able to lose weight in a long-term process in a stable way. Just have to have patience. So what are minimally processed foods? So these retain most of the nutrients and they're only slightly processed. These are really good to have, like almond butter. So they are, the whole form is almonds, and then we basically put it through a process to get them smooth. And it is a very good product to have. So do not be scared that it's minimally processed. It's just had to go through something in order to create that in a texture form. And another form of this is actually just freezing frozen vegetables because they're frozen. They had to go through something. So minimally processed foods are good, but we always have to read the ingredients if that makes sense too, which pushes us into the highly processed foods. Now, the reason why these are an issue is that it retains minimal nutrients. There's not much in there. There's way too many additives. It contains ingredients we literally cannot buy at a grocery store. When you read the ingredients, you're like, I said this as a challenge for client, pick up like your favorite Cheetos, and I want you to try and find all those ingredients in the grocery store. It's impossible, right? So that's the kind of what we think about it. And are we having this items in our diet more than the whole foods? Like, where is our spectrum? It tastes like something it's not. They have a very, very strong shelf life as well when it comes to highly processed foods. And they really are intended to be eaten as a snack food. Even protein powders, that kind of stuff is a convenience food, or they're eaten as a snack or as a supplemental food item, but they're not supposed to be our staple diet day in, day out, multiple times a day. Maybe there's celebrations, there are events, or we eat this in moderation. But I want you to really think about maybe what you ate yesterday and the day before, and where were you on this spectrum? This will give us some really good insight as to what might be going on with your set point in terms of your food. So why should we lower heavily processed foods? Why is that important? I'm not saying completely take them out of your diet altogether, but why would it be important? For one, it contains lower amounts of vitamins and minerals. So again, we lose the nutrients during our processing. One good example is white bread. When white bread is basically milled out, the fiber is taken out. And then what they do is they actually add it back in, right? So there's a lot of processes going on, and we lose out on the most key nutrients that our body needs. It contains a lot of added sugar. So the World Health Organization guidelines is 25 milligrams a day, yet most of us consume over 100, way over the amount. So we can, again, look at that spectrum of how much sugar are we consuming. And this isn't just natural sugars from fruits that I'm talking about, but these added sugars. There's a lot of different additives as well. Stabilizers, food colorings, flavors, gum, textures, MSG. And when it comes to gum, there's all kinds of like xanthan gum, there's all kinds of different ones. And with that, if you have a very sensitive stomach, that's going to be an issue. Some of us have no problem even having MSG, gum, flavorings, we're okay. But some of us struggle with it. So that's something that we need to be concerned of if we have a sensitive stomach. This could be causing quite a bit of issues. And again, taste preferences do change. They change over time and they will continue to change as the years that we're around, right? It doesn't just stop when we're 10 or 15. I remember I hated avocados as a kid. I love them now, right? So they change. And it can be hard to change to whole foods when our taste buds are used to this type of diet. So we slowly make that change. And again, processed foods are associated with many health issues. You can read the stats on that with diabetes, high cholesterol, thyroid issues, obesity. They are correlated, which means we do need to see where we're getting our foods from. So, when it comes to highly processed foods and why they're so irresistible, well, the refined carbohydrates will trigger insulin release, that jolt. And it's an addiction process, right? This is the feel good, euphoric moment. Our body loves it. So when it gets a processed foods, it shoots up a lot of these chemical responses and we get energy, but then we crash because it's not long standing. So if you look at this graph, when we have some really palatable food that we enjoy, we have the euphoria, satiety come up, insulin's going up, and then we crash, we get irritable and hunger and right? So our blood sugar goes down. Then we might have some more and it goes back up and comes back down. It's like the caffeine high, I call it, from processed foods. So when you think of blood sugar, we talk about it as blood glucose, and it comes from the food that we eat. And your body will create blood sugar by digesting some food into sugar. That's a normal process, and it'll circulate throughout the bloodstream. And we use blood sugar for energy. We need it, right? But it depends on the quality is very, very important. And the sugar that isn't needed to fuel, so we can't always use it all, your body right away gets stored in cells for later use. We're like, you don't need this. I'm going to store it. So when you think about the amount of sugar that we eat and we're not using it, we're storing it, but then it probably doesn't get used. And because we're consuming more and more of it. So we're just keep on storing it and not actually expending the stuff that we have. So a really cool way to do this when we have desired meals or we want to have something, we know I'm going to put a little bit more sugar in, my body is going to be storing that, but I know I'm not having it the next day, a few hours later, that I will use that item in my body because I'm using this in a balanced approach. So I'm not saying cut out highly processed foods altogether. We have to live and enjoy as well. But no, when we do have it, it's not an everyday, every meal occurrence. So another thing to look at is highly processed drinks. Now, the issue with this is if we're hungry and we drink a caloric food, it's not going to change our hunger. Our body cannot decipher between thirst and hunger when we drink. If we drink something, it's not to say, oh, I'm good. I'm no longer hungry. And they did a study on this and showed if somebody ate a piece of cake and then they went to a buffet and they ate a certain amount, they actually ate less than somebody that had the same amount of calories as that cake in a Coke or whatever soda pop they had. And then they went to the buffet. They actually end up eating more than the person that had the cake before. So there's a real big correlation between thirst and hunger. And we don't want to skew up those cues because it's really important to know. And again, a lot of things to look careful for is sugar sweetened beverages, pop, fruit juice, sports drinks, BCAAs. They might not have the calories in it, but they will grab up the sugar and it's not going to fix the hunger. Coffee creamers, sweet tea, energy drinks, and pre-workouts. These are all things we should be mindful of. And they add up in the day, whereas I'd rather you get it from foods, whole foods, have your water, have flavored water. BCAAs, when you work out, that's something you enjoy, but we're not sipping on it throughout the day to have it to curb cravings. We want to eat whole foods, and you'll realize your set point actually will go down if we take a systematic approach. When it comes to tolerance and withdrawal, right? When this is the dopamine hit that I want to talk about. So when we repeatedly do something that releases dopamine, it's that feel good reward system. Damn, it feels good, right? Such as drinking wine, maybe we have weed, maybe you're eating a Snickers bar, Reese's Pieces, dopamine receptors, they're going to start to downregulate. And if the brain observes that dopamine is too high, like we got way too much, it will begin to remove that dopamine. And it'll do this to keep things balanced. So more dopamine is needed to reach the same effect when there are fewer receptors, right? So when we have this, fewer receptors are taken out because we can't use all that. Like we can't have an endless supply of dopamine. So what happens is we have fewer receptors, which cause us to start eating more so that we have more dopamine coming in from that highly processed foods to achieve the same level of work before. It's called tolerance. We know this with alcohol, for example, that you're like, I used to be able to have one Mike's Hard Lemonade and was drunk when I was like 19. A lot different now, but I built up my tolerance from an alcohol standpoint. But even a cookie, right, where we used to feel really good, then it might be 3 or 4. Like we need more to get that feeling. Same with workouts, we get that, right? And if we understand that we're building up our tolerance and our dopamine system's getting askew. And if there are fewer dopamine receptors, we will have very little dopamine activity and we'll start to feel unhappy. And we won't get that food fix that we used to do. That's called withdrawal. That's what we kind of go through when we start to go into a whole foods diet. We take out those highly processed foods. We go through a non-food fix. It doesn't feel good. And this is associated with addictive disorders, the same thing in other ways of alcohol, right? Withdrawals are hard. There's some symptoms that and side effects that happen with that. So if you find that, you're getting headaches or you get irritable when it comes to reducing the processed foods that you're having, we do it systematically one by one so that it's not too overwhelming shot. And when it comes to overcoming highly processed foods, I wanted to talk about this because it's not a simple, easy approach. There's not an easy solution when it comes to being addicted to highly processed foods. And there's no supplement, there's no mental trick or magical remedy that's going to fix this other than support, guidance, education, and really working on it and being self-compassionate. So for again, like I've said, there's many people that the best thing to do is to avoid this altogether, but you need the skills in order to do so. And food addictions oftentimes require professional help. Behavioral therapy is really good. And sometimes medication is also involved. So if you do have an addiction to highly processed foods and you find it struggling to lower this set point, to lower your food consumption with this, you might have to get some extra support in order to do so. So when it comes to changing your set point, because that's what we're really after doing. So this does require eliminating or heavily reducing highly processed foods. I don't believe in fully taking everything out. If that's not something that you're going to want to have later in life, I want to be able for you to enjoy it, but we need to have it in balance and moderation. And it often will be tricky for the first few weeks, which is why your worksheet this week is going to give you a new approach to this that's going to be systematic, step by step, and we're going to do this with time on our hand. And over time, you're going to realize that you will lose taste for these highly processed foods. Don't believe me? I did. I was a wine gum, jelly bean, wine drinker. I just loved the sweets and I reduced that and changed and altered those foods that I had within that and had fruit instead of the jelly beans at night. And, made in a really nice like water spritzer with fruit in my instead of wine and noticed a big difference. And now that stuff is just too sweet for me, but it did take time. And I want you to be careful again, like I said at the beginning of the video, of processed diet foods or organic junk food products. Gonna say it out loud here, right? They will trigger your insulin levels. They'll shoot up that blood glucose levels and addiction part of the brain that wants more from the dopamine. So how can you start reducing, eliminating, or heavily reducing, right, highly processed foods? Well, first take an audit of your daily food consumption on that spectrum. So you're going to fill out that worksheet that you have. And we're going to look and see, where are you? Do we have more highly processed foods, whole foods? Where are we? Write down exactly what the highly processed foods that you have or you have on a weekly basis. And then what you're going to do is look at what item can you either replace, eliminate, or reduce in 7 to 14 days. So we're not overhauling your entire diet. We're not taking everything out. We're actually going to reduce it. If it's a soda every day, do we go to half a soda every day? Do we go to every other day? Do we eliminate that soda completely and put a tea in, right? So if we eliminate, you got to replace. We don't want to just take something out. Let's put something in. 7 to 14 days. Once you're comfortable with that, then we go to the next item. But we don't rush that. We want to kind of build that self-efficacy, build that confidence that, yes, we nailed that food item. It's no longer a trigger. And then we go on to the next and next. And again, like I said, I want you to pick an item that you're comfortable with. And it's not giving you 100%, like, no way would I ever take that out of my diet. I don't want to start with that. I want you to start with something that, yeah, well, I'd like it, but I'd be okay if I didn't. That's a way to build your confidence levels. So start with that. And again, think of what things you can add in. And if you want to add some extra flavor to the mix, put on some really, really nice veggies into your meals. Add some extra abundance. Maybe do the broccoli test of not 3 pounds, but add in some more veggies. Add in some more substance into your meals and see if that actually helps satisfy you throughout the day, that we actually didn't feel the need to have that highly processed fixed at the end. So really excited for you to fill out the worksheet. You're also going to get a CBT tool to help with this process, as well as some more recipes. So dive into this content, relook at these sheets and your PDF. And next week, we are going to start looking at menopause and pregnancy and why that also could be a factor as to why your set point might be where it is.